Nelson. Christine, your thoughts, lockdown. First of all, did you enjoy it?
Yes, I quite did, I'm afraid, the first one. And I agreed with, I think his name was Glenn, who said that the first lockdown was necessary. We really did not know what was happening. This pandemic was about to hit us. We simply didn't know. So I think it probably was the first lockdown was the right thing to do. And personally, seeing those Nightingale hospitals and all those beds with no space between any of them, the thought of ending up in one of those for your last dying days would have been horrendous. So I think people were pretty good to start with. But no,
I was going to say, luckily nobody went.
Nobody went. But I mean, it just went on and on and on. And do you remember Dr. Doom and Dr. Gloom? What were their names? Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance.
Oh, don't forget Jenny with her bad dresses. I was like, oh my God, that dress is horrible. It doesn't match anything, not even yourself.
They were telling us solemnly we had to do this and to do that and bang our saucepans and goodness knows what. They've now been knighted, services for wrecking the country, frankly. So no, I think the subsequent lockdown was absolutely ridiculous. It's destroyed the economy. And I don't think it's just that people miss, going to see their doctor or a specialist about heart problems or cancer
treatment.
No, not treatments. What is it? Symptoms.
Symptoms. Okay.
I think what COVID did, it weakened a lot of people physically. If they've had COVID, they're weaker. Therefore, they're now more likely to get something else. And apparently, we all drank far more, we ate far more, we moved far less. So I think probably the general physical health of the nation is not as good now as it would have been if we hadn't had such a prolonged lockdown.
Well, some people went from fit to fat, but others went in the other direction.
Yeah, I think on average, apparently, it was more alcohol, more food and less move.
What do you think, Nigel?
Well, certainly my shirt size has gone up, so that's why I don't wear a tie anymore.
Is it really?
I do think that as Christine just said, the first lockdown absolutely essential. We don't seem to have any sort of differences on that. I also think subsequent ones were too. I'm not sure that the tier system worked, but actual lockdowns was the only weapon in the armoury which was able to reduce deaths, reduce infections, and most importantly, hospitalisations. You look at the graph, and the moment that it spikes up there with high incidence of COVID, it comes straight down as soon as you have a lockdown. So that actually worked. Until the vaccine programme was bedded in, we didn't have any other protections. And if we hadn't done these things, you go back to the original predictions of 500,000 deaths. Now, well, there wasn't really a prediction.
Their modelling proved to be pretty inaccurate.
Except that it wasn't. Yes, I shouldn't have said a prediction. It's not a prediction. It was a warning of what might happen had we done nothing.
But then other countries did nothing. So, for example, places like Sweden, where they didn't do that much, and they ended up with a lower death rate and a thriving economy.
But Sweden is very patchy. That it started off, it looked like the Swedish model was actually working, and then they had a spike in infections. So,
but isn't that the programme? I mean, it goes up, spikes, and then it comes down and up and down. So that would.
But only if you take mitigation against it, which is what lockdowns actually did before we had vaccines.
But they didn't do that, though. But they didn't do that.
Not originally, and then it started to go up, and they had to bring in measures to try and stop people mixing. Up until then, people had used their common sense and actually didn't mix, and that's the way that it worked.
Well, what about now?
That's what we should have done.
What about now, though? Because now we're in a situation where we're looking at it and we're seeing that. We've got a record: 6.7 million people waiting for treatment now, 2.5 million patients waiting over 18 weeks. We've got 355,000 roughly patients waiting over a year for treatment. That's 7 times the number waiting over in 2020. So the outcome of this has been a massive backlog and a lot of people dying waiting.
Well, and apparently people going for cancer treatment was down by 35% during the first lockdown. Now the obvious result of that is what we're seeing now. I mean, I can understand people think that these COVID deaths are real and they're now, as it were, whereas the deaths that we're now seeing now and the illnesses were in the future and they could be parked. But you see, the government, apparently, in July 2020, there was a Department of Health study which talked about the quality-adjusted life years, the QALYs, and they projected, this is in 2020, July 2020, the government own report projected that there would be far more deaths along the line. Now, there wasn't a great deal of fuss about that. I wasn't aware of reading about it at the time, and I've only learned about it subsequently. So they knew what was coming down the tracks.
Yeah, it sounds to me it's more like that our organisation was wrong. We didn't We didn't. I mean, I'm going to blame Jeremy Hunt for not organising the NHS and not doing any prep for pandemics of this nature. So he has a lot to answer for. But if I look at the whole scenario, it's almost as though we hadn't looked at the end game. So after we've done this, we never appear to look at what happens as a result of it.
Well, we were all...
Sorry,
no.
I think that's absolutely right, that there was no pandemic planning, and especially you need planning for the aftermath.
Exactly.
And this is something that Britain does quite a lot. We go into wars and then don't think about what we're going to do with the country after the event. The point really about the lockdown issue is that it wasn't so much about deaths or infections or whatever. It was all about the NHS, making sure the NHS did not collapse. And had it become overwhelmed, we wouldn't have an NHS and we would have far more deaths now.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think the NHS is another thing we need to be discussing at some point, because people are actually paying more for the NHS coming out of our tax person than you would do if it was a private organisation.
But giving the opposite view to doctors' doom and gloom, as I call them, you had people like Professor Carol Sikora, who's a cancer expert. He's on GBNews quite a lot. And he was predicting way ago, before the second lockdown, in fact, probably even during the first lockdown, that this would ultimately lead to far more deaths through other things, cancer in particular, which is his speciality. So it's not as though we collectively didn't know it was coming. And yet still the government
I didn't really consider it in that way. I thought about it that we're protecting people more and saving the NHS. But I think my problem is that when we've returned back to so-called normal, they're carrying on as though we are in a pandemic. So a lot of people can now no longer see the GPs face to face. You try getting an appointment, good luck with that. I know, what's his name? Rishi Sunak was talking about charging people for not making the appointment. Well, you can't get the appointments, not going to an appointment that you can't get. But it's difficult to get an appointment. By the time they organise it, it's 3 to 6 weeks, people waiting 15 hours for an ambulance. I mean, the whole thing is a complete mess, and that can't all be down to lockdown. I think a lot of people are using this lockdown thing as an excuse, and COVID as an excuse for bad management all round.
But one of the problems, as well as the catastrophic impact on people's health that the lockdown had, is the impact on the economy. So there's far less money around to pay for more ambulances, more this, more that, more the other.
Well, it's inflation, a lot
all
of that.
All in all, it's been... and, of course, there have been outside problems.
But the point you make, Nana, about the NHS is absolutely right. That and we all accept, those of us who actually use it or what you hear about it outside, the people who work in it are wonderful. The system is completely breaking down, and it's the system that needs to be dealt with.
It's the envy of the world.
It's not.
But nobody copies it.
No, it's not the envy of the world.
Allegedly.
Even my father, who came, he was here, he was sick, he thought he would go and see the doctor here. When he realised when the appointment would be, he got a plane, went back to Ghana, and he's been treated there.
Now, when I say the envy of the world, I'm not saying it is the envy, but that is how it was always peddled. The NHS is wonderful system.
I think peddled in this country rather than abroad.
It's peddled here, but nobody wants to use
no other country has this total free system like we do. They all have some sort of health insurance.
Yeah. We're at the bottom. We're at the bottom, and I think when things are supposedly free, which they're not free, by the way, anyone who believes that is actually needs to look at their wage packet and national insurance contribution and understand that that's how it's being paid for. So you're paying for it. But anybody who looks at that system will realise that it's not really going to work, and we need to change it. But